Hello, my friends. This story will take us behind the Iron Curtain to the USSR. The USSR, the Soviet Union, was for a very long time involved in a Cold War, especially with the United States, against the backdrop of nuclear threats. The main concern of the USSR at that time was the surveillance of its airspace. They had long, complicated borders with many countries, and they couldn't monitor everything. So, on one hand, they wanted to monitor by placing radars and other devices everywhere, but at the same time, violations of their airspace were regular. So, what they did was compensate for this weakness with extreme strictness whenever someone crossed their airspace without authorization. For example, in 1983, they shot down a passenger plane, a Boeing 747 from Korean Airlines, Flight Cal 007, which they accused of spying. I covered this tragedy, which cost many lives, on this channel. I invite you to watch the video once you finish this one. So, what also happens is that regularly they had transgressions from small Tyro 9S. During the 1970s, several people stole airliners like Aero Club planes, Cessna 172s, and similar, and came to the USSR to seek asylum. These were people who were attracted by communism, by a very romantic vision of this country, and they came to seek asylum there. But well, in a way, it's true that it's nice when someone comes to your country to ask for asylum. In a way, it validates you, but at the same time, if he crossed several hundred kilometers of your airspace and you didn't notice. There were cases where they saw the plane land. They didn't catch it on radar or anything. Then suddenly, they saw a civilian aircraft taxiing on the tarmac, and then they told the military to run after it. So after that, they literally caught up to him on foot. So, in a way, every time there was this kind of incident, it ended up with generals and others being dismissed. It also culminated in 1987 with the story of Matthias Rust. He was this young German who had taken off from West Germany. At the time, Germany was divided in two, the FRG in the west and the GDR in the east. So he took off in a Cessna 172, flew over several European countries, and then at one point he decided to head straight for Moscow, and he landed his plane on Red Square. At first, his idea was to literally land inside the Kremlin walls, but after a while, he got scared. He thought to himself, if I land behind the Kremlin walls, the KGB will catch me. No one will see the plane land, there won't be any photos, and I'll just disappear. And he was probably right. So, at the last minute, he decided to change his mind and land on Red Square, outside the Kremlin. In fact, he landed on one of the bridges, he rolled, and then there are some pretty impressive images of this German-registered aircraft parked on Red Square in front of St. Basil's Cathedral. So, you should know that these airspace violations had an ulterior motive. Because if you look at nuclear deterrence up until now, how does it work? One of the aspects, we're maybe not talking about intercontinental missiles, supersonic or hypersonic ones, and submarines and all that, but there is the possibility in the deterrence arsenal to fly planes at very low altitude. So planes, potentially fighter jets or multi-purpose planes, as they say, which can be used for combat but can also be used for other things. They attach atomic bombs underneath. They literally fly at very low altitude, which means for the pilot, when he looks at the clock on a church tower, well, it'll be at the level of his cockpit or even slightly above it. He flies at a very, very low altitude, penetrates deep into enemy territory, and drops an atomic bomb. So if the USSR, if its territory isn't monitored, well, it can expect overnight an intrusion like that. By the way, if you look closely, just to mention, maybe to talk about Matthias Rust. This 18-year-old young man, was he really alone in organizing his stunt? It seems a little far-fetched, because in reality he had a Cessna 172, and if you look at the distance he was able to cover with that Cessna, he went all the way to Iceland, even though he's only supposed to have his beginner's experience hours. He has his flight hours, and he manages to do oceanic navigation and make it all the way to Iceland. In the plane, he had removed the back seats and installed additional fuel tanks. I don't know many 18-year-old kids who can do that. He found the money, the resources, how he was able to install that kind of fuel tank in the plane, who gave him the keys to the Cessna 172 when he was completely inexperienced, who allowed him to go on that kind of navigation. So you can sense that there was some kind of manipulation because this young man, young Matthias Ross, wasn't completely in his right mind. The proof is that afterwards he spent 14 months in prison in the USSR, and later, once he returned to Germany, he attacked a colleague with a knife. She had rejected him and he attacked her. He spent several months in prison after that. He was involved in a city vote, a scam. He stole from people. He committed thefts. He also converted to Hinduism. He practiced yoga. So when you add all that up, clearly this is not someone who was in his right mind. So he was probably manipulated by American agencies or others who handed him the opportunity, and he just went along with it. But there were more resources, more organization behind it than it seems. In fact, one last detail allows me to support this suspicion. Mr. Matthias Rust's Cessna 172, where is it today? It's in a museum. It's still displayed in a museum. You can see it. If you look at the tail, there are places where you can see that a sticker was torn off. There are places where there's a bit of dirt and dust related to glue from a sticker that's no longer there. What was there? Well, if you look closely, there are photos showing the aircraft parked in Red Square. Actually, there's only one photo that I was able to find. And what does it show? Well, in that spot, there was an image of an atomic bomb. That means there was, on both sides of the vertical stabilizer, the vertical fin, there was a sticker of the Hiroshima atomic bomb, Fat Boy. If you look closely, it's exactly Fat Boy. That ovoid shape plus the little legs like that, well, that's Fat Boy from Hiroshima. And so he was able to land in Red Square with precisely that aircraft and an atomic bomb, at least in the form of a sticker on his plane. So, at the same time, as I mentioned in the video related to the Cal accident, or rather the shooting down of Cal 007. The Americans and NATO were provoking the Soviets at their borders. So regularly, what they did for years, it was always the same. They would take off with planes, rush toward the borders, and then the Soviets would panic, seeing planes appear on their radar, and then suddenly they would turn around and go back. And they did this every morning. They ate breakfast at specific places, boarded the plane, performed the maneuver, and returned daily for years. This routine built up tension and paranoia. So we're going to go to Kaliningrad in 1972 on May 16th. During the previous months, there were at least 2 intrusions by young people who came to ask for asylum. So it's good, as I said, but at the same time, there were generals who were dismissed because it was unacceptable that the airspace was not protected. So what we decided to do on May 16th, we decided to do reenactments. We decided to do full-scale exercises to understand how these planes that arrived were able to evade the radars. So we took an Antonov 24 and Antonov 24T. The letter T means it had a turbine-type engine. It's a turboprop engine. So clean, I didn't say clean, I said proper, but sometimes it sounds like clean. So what happens is that inside there were 6 crew members, and Soviet planes had a lot of people in the cockpit. And in particular, one of the most important men is not necessarily the captain, but the navigator. The navigator is usually a political commissar. At the same time, why? He has a console where he can enter headings, he can enter instructions for the autopilot. That means when the air traffic controller says turn right to heading 130, he's the one who enters the heading into his console. Why did he do that? It was to prevent defections, to keep control of the aircraft, to prevent others from having any ideas of, well, running away. So let me tell you, there were 6 people in the cockpit, including the radio operator, navigator, co-pilot, captain, and others. And in the back, we had 2 passengers who were 2 lieutenant colonels who were there to supervise, the operation. So what was the aircraft doing? It was heading out, so over the Baltic Sea. It's roughly around noon. It's May 16th. It was heading toward the Baltic Sea and then coming back. And then it started to lose altitude to fly very low. which remains to this day one of the most proven techniques to evade radar. So, they were flying lower and lower and were in contact with the radar services to try to see from what altitude they would really disappear. So, they were literally mapping out their blind spots with that flight. So now there are several more problems that come into play here. First of all, this Antonov 24 had apparently undergone altimeter replacements, so altimeters they had taken from an Ilyushin, but it seems that those altimeters hadn't been properly calibrated. That means they tended to overestimate the altitude. So already, if you're flying very low and you have errors in the altimeter readings, and on top of that, in the wrong direction, it means the indicated altitude is higher than the real one. So that's not good. Another thing, the pilots came from the 263rd Transport Regiment, and they were under the influence of alcohol. It has to be said that this is always, we often find this ingredient in Soviet aviation accidents, that many pilots had a problematic relationship with alcohol. So, they drank during flights because most of the time they didn't drink before flying. Why? Because there was always a doctor's office. That means before every flight, literally, when the crews arrive at the airport, the first thing they do, well, the last thing they do before going to the plane was to go to the doctor's office. Who will smell them, see that, well, they can still manage to walk 2 steps one after the other, even if, as Coluche would have joked, only just, but still. And they take their blood pressure and all that to check that they're okay. So a lot of pilots, what they did was they took the bottles with them or they grabbed them from the duty-free shop. And when they arrived, well, in a military plane, there isn't really a duty-free shop, but you get what I mean. When they got to the cockpit, that's when they started drinking. As I was saying, unfortunately, alcohol was involved. Now we're getting to the tragic part of this story. It's May 16th, and around noon, there's a 2-story building in Kaliningrad. That building is a daycare center with children. The children were outside with a few adults supervising them. They were out for a walk and had just come back into the building. So, in the building, there are about 29 people, including one person outside with a ladder doing a repair. At one point, this Antonov is going to fly at low altitude. It's going to dive toward the ground to try to get as low as possible. It enters a patch of fog. The pilots are in a mindset of overestimating their altitude or their height at this stage. And then a wing is going to hit a tree. So one wing is going to hit a tree and the plane will end up crashing into the building I mentioned. So it crashes into the building. The building will catch fire immediately. What happens is that the people who are in the aircraft, so the crew plus those 2 lieutenant colonels, will die instantly. They were killed instantly at the moment of impact. And then, since a big fire broke out of the 29 people who were in the building, 27 of them died. 27, that's 24 children and 3 adults who were there to supervise them. So it turned into a huge tragedy that day. And what happened is that immediately KGB officers arrived, or what we call the KGB, maybe not quite accurately. The KGB arrived and then tried to cover up the story. It was very often like that because in the USSR, people were mostly afraid of being ridiculed. They were afraid for their image. It was absolutely necessary. In fact, the USSR literally, until 2 hours before its collapse, the facade never cracked. They did everything to keep up this image of strength, organization, and control. But if you just scratch a little beneath the surface, you realize it's a disaster on every level. So what they did was, in the hours following the accident, literally within 24 to 36 hours after the accident, the building was demolished, completely demolished. The broken trees were cut down and transported by truck. Afterward, we put in flower beds as if nothing had happened. And the very next day, someone who stops at that spot doesn't find their daycare. The only thing that remained for a long time was the smell of kerosene, a persistent smell of kerosene. Kerosene, when it spills somewhere, well, it will smell. Sometimes you can smell it for weeks. There was a constant kerosene smell, but nothing more. On the day of the funeral, they banned photos, of course, and banned journalists. They also stopped the railways in the area, saying it was a maintenance issue to prevent people from coming. Despite everything, a few rare photos were taken, hidden for a long time, and eventually surfaced. I'm going to share them with you. You'll see they're quite moving images. And actually, that's it. And we understand why they wanted to hide the story. Quite simply, you realize already they can't control their airspace. It's too big for them. They can't control it. They have full on constant intrusions, including from disturbed 18-year-olds. Just to tell you, a Cessna 172 can land in Red Square. Can you imagine, huh, if it had been a fighter jet, with atomic bombs or something like that, huh? I mean, it could have happened just as easily, even faster. So after that, they want to run simulations and see how they can secure their airspace. And what do? They're going to kill their officers, destroy their planes, their aircraft, and destroy a building full of children. So, I mean, a failure at that level, you can't do worse. Worse than that is death. That's it. So the story only came out in bits and pieces much later, and it was quite a lot of work to gather it all together. And probably we still don't know all the details. Anyway, my friends, thank you for watching this story up to this point. There's another story on Patreon. I post on Patreon or the paid section of YouTube. Another story also happened in the USSR that really ridiculed aviation of that time, which had a lot of accidents, by the way, that were quite horrific. When you look at them, you think this can't be real. But there you go. It's incredible but true. There you go. In another story that's not public. You can access it by backing this channel on Patreon. Thank you for watching this video up to this point, and I'll see you in the next one.